One of the scariest dungeons in Season 2 of Dragonflight must be Brackenhide Hollow. But listen, with this complete and up-to-date M+ guide, you'll have a breeze going through it. Maybe doing a +2, a +3, having a nice chest at the end and improving your score. Everything is covered here, like from the routes to the strategies to the nasty abilities, stuff to interrupt, all of that right here. And obviously, as always, these Mythic Plus guides and class guides are made 100% through the support of our Patreon. Patreon.com/MarcelianOnline is the place to check out if you're interested on seeing a lot more of these in the future. It's not required, but it definitely makes a huge difference. You can get like access to bloopers, Patreon exclusive podcasts, not to mention some cool wallpapers with your characters on them. Check them out. Now let's get into the route. The route options here are endless, really, and you can set up your route based on your group composition. If you have a gateway skip, a shroud, water walk-in, or a priest, you can avoid several large packs of mobs or mini-bosses along the way. Priests can open the Tuskar cages at the start without engaging the trash mobs with the use of Mind Soothe and Fade. Warlocks can help you gateway skip the bridge and mean old stink breath guards. And Shroud/Stealth or Invis potions can help you escape much more. However, beware. Until you kill the first 3 bosses, the graveyard spawn point is still at the entrance. So if you skip something along the way, make sure you can get back easily if you wipe. The route we recommend is bug-friendly and has no skips for obvious reasons. And the player profile we use has color coding for interruptible and important mobs and casts in all the Dragonflight dungeons, so feel free to grab it from the description below. First off, we recommend that you have a Disease Dispel class with you, or an Alchemist to make your life easier when clearing this dungeon. There are cauldrons spread around the dungeon which the Alchemist can unlock for the whole party and give you a 5-minute charge of Cleansed Rot on your extra action button, which will remove a disease on you. Especially helpful against Rotoxers. A nice change Blizzard did to the cauldrons is that they now seem to have infinite uses, so if you consume your charge, you can run back and get a new one, or simply open up the next nearby cauldron. You can see their location marked on the Keystone Guru maps. Now let's talk about all the trash in the area leading up to the first boss. And one thing we want to mention is that a lot of them are scaredy hyenas who run away on low health, so be prepared to CC them into place or kill them off quickly, unless you enjoyed them ninja pulling other packs for you. First off, in order to gain access to the first boss of the dungeon, you will need to free 5 Tuskars from the meat storage cages around the first area of the dungeon, who are surrounded by gnolls and hyenas. You can only free them while out of combat, so tanks, be aware of this please. We have the Bone Bolt Hunters, who are pretty dangerous mobs and a priority to kill. They cast Bone Bolt, a cast which deals moderate damage and leaves a bleed on its target, so keep it CC'd when possible, but it's not the end of the world if you miss one. Toxic Trap is a dangerous ability which throws a green swirly under a random player which activates shortly after. You really need to run out of this, as it hits like a truck or just one-shots you in higher keys. If it activates under a player, it will also drop a pool of poop you need to keep out of. Shoot is a non-interruptible cast which you need to heal through. The hunters are accompanied by vicious hyenas, who bite your tank and leave a 15% healing reduction effect on them with infected bite. Cruel Bone Crushers do crushing smash on nearby melee targets, dealing physical damage and leaving a movement speed reduction on their target. Funnily enough, they seem to really like pets and summon guardians, as in our runs they loved attacking the Hunter Dire Beasts, Warlock's Blasphemies, and if those weren't around, they would just go for the main pets, leaving our melees for last. Cannot complain! Bracken War Scourges are deadly mobs if you don't pay attention. They cast Rage Storm, a channel whirlwind that deals AoE damage within 5 yards and can be suited out of it, so either run away or have a suit class with you. Generally after this cast they do Hideous Cackle, an interruptible AoE fear which you should be very careful with and make sure it does not go through. They also have a Pack Tactics aura, increasing damage done by nearby allies by 15% and reducing their cooldowns by 25%. So don't pull them with too many other trash mobs, as they will buff everyone. Their last ability is Bloody Bite, dealing physical damage to a random enemy and leaving a stacking bleed on them, dealing damage for the next 15 seconds or until they are healed above 90% health. This is an ability that claw fighters also have, so you can have several of them on your group at the same time, so keep everyone topped up. Fighters also cast Vicious Claw Mangle, fixating a player and dealing physical damage to them for the next 5 seconds. Run away, Shadow Meld, or CC them out of this channel. Decay Speakers are high priority mobs who cast Decay Surge, dealing nature damage. More importantly, they cast Withering Burst at a player, placing a green circle around them. They will then launch a bolt of rot at them, which will do damage on impact to everyone within the 4-yard circle, and place Withering on them, a disease which deals damage, reduces haste and movement speed by 40%, and it stacks up to 10, so dispel this as soon as possible, either with a disease removing spell or with the use of the cauldrons placed around the dungeon. Another important ability they have is summoning a Rot Chanting Totem, which enhances the abilities of other trash mobs, so focus it down as soon as possible. Trickclaw Mystics cast Earthbolt, an interruptible cast that doesn't hurt too much, but they become more dangerous when a totem is up and they start casting Witherbolt until the totem is destroyed. This deals a lot of damage and places the Withering disease on players as well, so keep this interrupted and nuke the totem. Fishface is a guy who's peacefully fishing, found on the far left side of the area in case you decide to water walk your way there and clear trash on that side. If you bother him, he casts Fish Slap, a 3-second AoE cone stun, which can be outranged. His second ability is Fresh Catch, dealing damage and gripping a player to him if they're out of range. Now that you're familiar with all the gnolls and hyenas in the first area, I assume you freed all the poor Tuskars, so let's meet Hackclaw's Warband. The first boss encounter has a team of 3 bosses who enrage with Blood Frenzy when one of them reaches 15% health, so try to clip them down more or less equally if you don't want to deal with this for an extended period of time. They also have a Prey on the Weak buff throughout the fight, which stacks up depending on your group's health. For every 10% health missing from the players, all 3 bosses gain a stack of the Predatory Instincts buff, increasing their haste by 10%. So if everyone is on 100% health, they will not have this buff. Hello healers. The lower the health of your party, the more stacks they will gain, so heal people up quickly and they will lose their stacks. The more you fall behind on healing, the tougher it will be to get everyone back to full health due to Gutshot's Gash Frenzy, an attack he does on the group by shadow stepping behind the players 5 times, dealing physical damage and applying a bleed effect on them for the next 45 seconds. The bleed continues to do damage and it stacks up if you get targeted several times. This works pretty much like the Grievous affix we used to have, and it will get removed when the player's health is above 90%. So it's very important that everyone uses defensives and self-heals to help out the healer in this fight. Gutshot will also cast Marked for Butchery on a player, dealing large amounts of physical damage to them every half a second for the next 4 seconds. This player will need to use an immunity or be spot healed. Use them defensives as this is quite deadly. We tried running away, kiting, disengaging, it doesn't work. He will teleport right behind you and stab you. Also, very important, healers. Make sure the targeted player doesn't have the Gash Frenzy debuff on them. Otherwise, you're both gonna have a really bad time on this boss. His last attack is Decayed Senses, throwing decay at the tank, dealing nature damage and blinding them. This also increases their physical damage taken by 150% for 15 seconds. On the bright side, this is a magic debuff which should be dispelled as soon as possible by the healer, a mass dispel, an imp dispel, any magic dispel. Or even better, if you happen to run with a warrior tank, they can spell reflect this back onto the boss, ignoring the mechanic, and making the boss take 100% extra physical damage. The problem is that this attack generally happens at the same time as the 2 other dangerous mechanics from the other bosses, so you will need to do some quick maths to deal with all of them at once if you don't have a way to ignore this. We will get back to the overlaps after we discuss the rest of the warband. Rira Hackclaw's auto attacks cleave all players in front of her within 8 yards, so tanks point her away from the group and group don't be in her face. She will occasionally target a player for Savage Charge, pointing a gigantic red arrow at them which the tank needs to intercept and soak by standing between the boss and the player, unless the targeted player uses an immunity for it, or simply uses Feign Death or other similar abilities to cancel it. If it's a non-immunity class, your party members who have immunities will be able to intercept it and save them. Make sure to not pop it too early though, as the cast is quite long. Plenty of time to position. Her last attack is Blade Storm, fixating a random player and spinning towards them at a reduced speed, dealing damage to anyone within her hitbox. Run away from her during this ability, as it deals loads of damage and she can also cast it several times in a row, on the same target, or she can pick someone else. The third boss of the warband is Trick Totem, and she casts Greater Healing Rapids, an interruptible healing spell on one of her allies, which will also leave a purgeable healing over time effect on them if it goes through, so prioritize interrupts on this cast and purge it if you fail. She also casts Earth Bolts at her target, dealing nature damage. You should keep this interrupted with any spare interrupts. Her most notable ability is Hex Trick Totem, summoning a totem which incapacitates a player for 15 seconds. Kill this totem quickly, as it seems to prefer healers and comes around at the same time as Decay's Senses, the dispellable incap on the tank we discussed earlier. Now, about the overlaps. While Gutshot throws Decayed Senses at the tank, the totem incaps the healer and Hackclaw focuses the DPS with Savage Charge. What do you do if you don't have external dispels like an imp or mass dispel for the tank? Well, all DPS must instantly swap to the totem to free the healer so that he can dispel the tank, so that the tank can get in between Hackclaw and the DPS to soak the cleave. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. There is also the option of the DPS move in with the arrow to position it on the incapacitated tank, but then you might kill them as they take 150% extra damage from their incap debuff. Another way to deal with this is if the ranged DPS has an immunity or Feign Death for the cleave. Either way, release the healer as soon as possible! Whew, that was a long one. Now that the warband is down, you have a choice. Left or right, right or left. What will you choose? More gnolls? Or perhaps evil plants? Either way, click this cauldron right here in the middle just in case. If you choose to go right towards Treemouth and kill him as your second boss, you will encounter several types of new mobs. Brackenhide Shapers are gnolls who summon Lashers to attack you. These infected Lashers do melee attacks which can give you a stack and bleeding debuff dealing physical damage. Touch of Decay is an interruptible cast which deals nature damage, so keep it interrupted, but more importantly, focus on interrupting Infuse Corruption, a 6-second channel which applies a stack of Withering every 3 seconds on the target, so if you dispel the debuff without interrupting the channel, you will just get a new debuff. Decaying Slimes do melee damage and they burst on death, leaving behind a pool of decay for 30 seconds. Move out of this when it triggers. Decayed Elders also summon Lashers, the same as the Brackenhide Shapers, so cleave them down with the rest of the pack. The Elders also cast Decaying Roots, an interruptible spell which roots you, deals nature damage and reduces haste by 10% for 9 seconds. The Wilted Oaks, guess what? They also summon Lashers, this time with their Essence of Decay aura. They also cast Stomp, a large AoE swirly you need to move out of. If you don't, it will inflict physical damage and stun you. Their last ability is Necrotic Breath, an interruptible frontal attack which deals nature damage and reduces healing taken by 20% if you get hit. Around the area you will also find Wild Lashers and Infected Lashers who just do melee attacks and sometimes apply the stacking bleeding that we mentioned before. Fetid Rot Stingers are priority mobs in this area, as they have a Pack Tactics aura, increasing the damage of their nearby allies by 15% and reducing their cooldowns by 25%, so maybe don't pull them in Gigapacks. They also cast Summon Totem, summoning a Decay Totem, which does an initial 5-second cast of Withering, which will throw the debuff on your entire party, and then pulses every 10 seconds, applying a stack of Withering to all players. You can dispel the disease with the use of cauldrons or a disease dispel once again, preferably before it starts stacking up, but you should focus down the totem as soon as it spawns. Burst of Decay is their last attack, and it inflicts nature damage to enemies within 5 yards of their target, which is easily visible by the green circle around the character, so spread out. Monstrous Decay are big, non-interruptible blobs which cast Gushing Ooze, dealing nature damage and leaving a dot on their target. Below 20% health, they will start casting burst spawning decaying slimes if not killed before the end of their cast. Alright, we have yet another gigantic elemental boss fight. Treemouth is here to eat you up. The first ability of this boss is Vine Whip, a frontal aimed at the tank which deals a large amount of physical damage and knocks back all players struck. So tanks point this away from the group and everyone else don't stay behind the tank. The boss also occasionally casts Decay Spray on a random player, spawning swirlies around them and summoning 4 decaying slimes, which cast Gushing Ooze, an interruptible cast which really hurts, so make sure no cast goes through. For this, you can also use AoE stuns, AoE silences, etc. Cleave the slimes down with the boss if you can deal with the amount of interrupts, otherwise just focus them. When these slimes die, they leave behind a pool of decay, and anyone standing in it will be withering away, suffering nature damage and being slowed by 30%, so quickly move out if you happen to be too close. At 100 energy, Treemouth will cast Grasping Vines, trying to drag all players towards him, and then consume anyone standing within the 10-yard green circle at the end of the cast, so run away from this. While consuming, the boss devours the players and deals nature damage every 1.5 seconds for 10 seconds, but he will also gain an Absorb Shield. Once the shield is broken, he spits out the consumed players. When a consumed player gets spit out, he gets a partially digested debuff for 1 minute, which increases the damage they take from the next consume by 200%. So you either need to alternate who from the group goes in to be consumed, or the tank has to use a big defensive or get an external. At least one player has to get consumed every time, otherwise the boss will gain the Starving Frenzy buff, increasing his damage done by 100% and haste by 20% for 3 minutes. Once the boss is dead, you can move on to the next part of the dungeon. However, if you prefer living this as a third boss, let's see what we would have encountered had we gone left after the first boss. But before that, we'd like to mention that after killing the second boss, the resurrection spawn point will not be closer just yet. We think it becomes available at the second boss you kill, as you walk somewhere in between the second and the third boss. When we tested this, the checkpoint at Treemouth became available after crossing the bridge guarded by Stink Breath before killing Stink Breath. So, turning left after killing Hackclaw's warband, you will encounter more gnoll mobs and their pets. Bone Bolt Hunters have the same abilities as before, but they get more diversity in their pet choices. Flesh Ripper Vultures cast Screech, an interruptible spell which does pretty heavy AoE damage, so don't let it go through. Skulking Gut Stabbers are stealthy mobs you can discover by throwing a flare or ground effects in the areas where they are hanging out. You can also see them with the Demon Hunter's Spectral Sight ability. They're all around this side of the dungeon, so tread carefully. They leap behind a random target and cast Withering Poison on them, inflicting nature damage and leaving a damage over time effect, which also reduces haste and movement speed by 40%. An easy way we found to deal with this is to have a hunter in the party, have the range stack on them and throw a trap behind them. The Gut Stabbers will get insta-trap when they leap. This will give you time to move away from them and not get the poison. They will also cast Bloody Bite, leaving a bleed which goes away if the target is healed above 90% health, same as we dealt with the mobs at the start of the dungeon. Wrathbow Stalkers are evolved hunters, let's say, who have the Pack Tactics aura, empowering nearby allies. They have the same abilities as the hunters like Shoot and Bone Bolt, but they also have a Bone Bolt Volley, dealing damage to all players within 40 yards. The last ability is Scented Meat, where they throw meat at a random player, dealing impact damage when they hit you in the face with it, and also leaving a dot ticking every half a second for the next 10 seconds. This will also make nearby beasts focus the meat-smelling player. They are generally accompanied by hyenas, vultures, or gut-chewer bears. The bears cast Maul, inflicting physical damage to their target, and at the moment they seem to get confused by the Scented Meat fixate, so they just follow you and deal no damage during this mechanic. We are expecting a fix on this soon though. On this path you will also find a large gate leading into an area with a lonely Wurscourge surrounded by traps. Do not be fooled, he is not alone, he is surrounded by a pack of stealthed gut stabbers who will lock the gates behind you. So make sure everyone from your group manages to get inside and not get locked out. While fighting these mobs, a Wrathbow sentry up on the cliff to your left will continuously shoot sentry fire at your party, placing a swirly on the floor, dealing physical damage, which you should dodge. These stop shooting when the Wurscourge dies, and then they play dead after the gauntlet is over. Gutshot is the second or third boss depending on the route you want to take. He has the Hunt Leader's Tactics aura, increasing damage done and reducing the cooldowns of nearby allies, so all of his hyena buddies will be constantly buffed. When you start the fight, he is accompanied by 2 hyenas who will attack the tank up until the boss casts Meat Toss at a random player, placing a Smell Like Meat debuff on them, making his hyenas fixate that player. Make sure to defeat his pets before he casts Coal Hyenas, summoning 2 more pets, which will either come from the cave or the bridge you passed to get here. The hyenas do a Crippling Bite, dealing instant damage and leaving a bleed effect which deals more damage, and it reduces healing taken and movement speed by 50% for 10 seconds. They also cast Bounding Leap, jumping to a random target, dealing physical damage and stunning players within 3 yards for 4 seconds. So move out of the goddamn swirly. Ensnaring Trap is a mechanic which throws traps at 2 players, dealing damage and snaring targets when triggered. You should position these at the bridge or cave entrance to trap the hyenas that join the fight, or kite hyenas into them if positioned elsewhere. The hyenas will also go into a feeding frenzy when they focus on a target that smells like meat. They will enrage for 10 seconds, increasing their damage done by 100%. But this can and should be suited if you have a class that can do that. The boss will also cast Master's Call, an interruptible cast freeing the hyenas from the traps and making them immune to such effects for the next 5 seconds, but also increasing their movement speed by 15%, so make sure to have your interrupt ready for this. He will also shoot at random players, inflicting physical damage to them. Gutshot is a tank buster, inflicting physical damage and knocking the player back, so be careful with your positioning when tanking this boss. Don't have a trap behind you and make sure you won't get thrown off the edge, like this noob tank here, who didn't watch a guide before going to the dungeon. God damn it. Now that we're done with these areas, let's see the trash in between the second and the third boss, regardless of the order you choose to do them in. The most notable trash mob in this area is Stink Breath, a mini-boss who guards the bridge leading up to Treemouth. He casts Violent Whirlwind, spinning around, dealing physical damage to everyone within 7 yards and knocking them back, so melees should stand max range to DPS. His Stink Breath is a frontal cone attack towards a random player, disorienting them and everyone else standing in front for 4 seconds. Ranged players can also outrange this attack if they are far enough. Getting hit by this will also cause tanks to drop aggro, so don't pull too many other mobs with him or just skip him with a gateway, like this, or With a priest, you'll figure it out. In this area, there are also plenty of stealthed skulking Gutstabbers, so be careful where you walk. You can skip a bunch of them by walking up this hill here coming from Treemouth and avoiding the stealthers. If you choose to take the straightforward path, you will also find Rageclaw in the area here. He has a feral claw dealing physical damage to his target. He will also cast Bloodthirsty Charge on a random player. You can sidestep this as he locks position once he fixates. All players who stand in his way will take physical damage, get a small knockback, and also receive a dot for the next 6 seconds. All this because they were lazy. His last ability is Bloody Rage, an Enrage which increases his damage by 125% and attack speed by 100%, and your usual suitors can work their magic and calm him down. Now that you're on your way to the last boss, you again have 2 choices of paths to take. Clearing from Treemouth to the last boss, you will have to complete a gauntlet which will continuously spawn little wither rings from the moment you pass this route here until you kill the last pack of the gauntlet all the way over here. Make sure your healer has full mana for it. Both paths, from Treemouth and from Gutshot, have the same types of mobs, with the difference that the trash after Gutshot is not part of a gauntlet, and you can time your pulls however you like. The Witherlings just do melee attacks and apply Bloody Bite, same as many other gnolls we discussed already, along with most of the mobs in this area, like the Witherbiters. Other new mobs you encounter here are the Filth Callers, who cast Decay Surge, an interruptible attack which deals nature damage. Their Rotting Surge ability spawns swirlies on the floor while channeling this, and it can be CC'd. Make sure to dodge the swirlies on the floor as it will deal damage to anyone hit and continue to deal damage to those standing there. Disease Slashers have Decay Claws, dealing physical damage to their targets and placing a healing absorb effect on the tank for the next 15 seconds. While Rothhexers cast Withering Contagion, which deals damage and places a disease on the target, leaving a dot for 15 seconds, reducing their damage done by 20% and spreading to any player within 5 yards, so spread out when you see this cast happening. If you hug, your healer will not have a good time. Don't forget to use the cauldrons around this area to get rid of the disease and thus the spreading. Siphon Decay is their second ability, which deals nature damage to all players within 30 yards and absorbs all of their Withering Contagion debuffs, increasing their own physical damage done by 5% per stack gain. This is a magic buff on the Rothhexer and can be dispelled with purges. However, it's best if you just dispel your disease and not buff him in the first place. Something to mention about the route choices is that here there will be loads more Rothhexers on the Gutshot side, which we recommend skipping. The Gauntlet, on the other hand, is full of War Scourges, which are also quite annoying. The final boss in this dungeon has a few notable abilities. He starts the fight off with a Choking Rot Cloud, which is a frontal attack aimed at the tank, and it deals a lot of damage in a frontal cone, also summoning a cloud which will slowly travel clockwise around the boss area. Standing within this cloud deals damage, silences you, and applies a stack of Withering Rot, so avoid standing within this cloud at all costs. Withering Rot is a debuff that does taking nature damage and reduces your damage done by 2% per stack. The boss also frequently spawns a Rot Burst totem on the floor, which keeps casting Rotting Burst while it is up, so nuke this totem down fast. If the Withering Rot stacks get too high, this fight can get really nasty. The boss also casts Decay Strike on the tank, hitting them twice in a quick succession and inflicting physical damage to them, but also absorbing healing taken, so healers make sure to top off the tank quickly to remove the absorb. After every second totem spawn, the cloud despawns and the boss starts casting Decaying Strength. At the end of this cast, the boss absorbs all the Withering Rot stacks from the players and increases his damage done by 5% per stack absorbed. During this cast, the group also gets Withering Eruption. This puts a circle around them and explodes on all nearby players at the end of the Decaying Strength cast, so spread out of this and try to have as few Withering Rot stacks as possible, as the size of the circle depends on the amount of stacks you have. After absorbing the stacks, the boss once again casts Chokin Rot Cloud, and the same rotation of spells start again. Because it is the highest priority to nuke down the totems as soon as possible, it is important to note that the totem always spawns on the opposite side of the boss area from where the boss is positioned. So the tank should kite the boss around, making sure that the totem does not spawn in the cloud, or in an area where the cloud is about to go to, as the melee DPS and tank will not be able to DPS the totem at that time. Try to make the totems spawn behind the cloud, so everyone can swap straight away when the totem spawns. Do this and you'll be golden. This was a long one, I know, but you need to get every information correctly and understand all of the routing and all of the gigapacks of mobs, because there's a lot of them, let's be fair. And I know there's a lot of folks out there who were struggling with this in specific affixes. Hope this helps, but if you follow everything thoroughly from the guide, you should be 100% golden and finish up your Brackenhide M+ runs no problemo. Once again, thank you Patrons for supporting these Mythic Plus guides and the class guides. Sorry for my voice, once again, got a little bit of a cold, it's not leaving me alone. If you want to check more details about our Patreon, go into the description, patreon.com/MarcellianOnline, and there's all a bunch of goodies there. Thank you for watching the video, we'll see you in the next guide. Bye!
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.